Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Tuesday, which means once again it's time for Lancing with Myself, the 5-minute YouTube show where I talk about being a game designer and a creative, especially when you're low on spoons and low on cash. Today I want to talk about that mystical phrase that they use in writing all the time, which is write what you know. Do we design what we know? What does that phrase mean? Well, it's a very interesting question, and I'm going to answer it by telling you a story about how some of my games came about. This is a game called The Price. I'm still developing it, but it works and it's interesting. It's a game about what happens when you're very poor and how poverty strips away every part of life bit by bit until you know, the very act of surviving to the next payday of rent destroys everything that is worth living for. So it's quite a grim theme, but it was an interesting process getting to this game. I originally came up with the mechanic when I was trying to design a Civ game. Civ games are quite a staple of the board gaming genre. They've been around for years, you know. The original Avalon Hills Civ, Sid Meier's Civ was inspired by that, and then of course has been turned into several board games. There's Tapestry, very popular at the moment. There's that other one that begins with H that I can't remember the name of. Everyone has had interesting ideas about how to bring this process of history into the board game element, usually involving the similar sorts of elements about economic and cultural and military history, whether it uses a map and actual war game elements or dudes on a map, or, you know, or if it's some sort of more abstract mechanic. Seven Wonders, for example, is a Civ game. I thought to myself, that would be a great challenge, you know? Can I actually make a Civ game? So I made a list of the things I'm interested in about history. I am fascinated by the way cultures evolve and borrow and share things. I had this mechanic idea in my head that was about passing things forward to the next generation, which is, you know, a way that you could study history about what cultures keep, what they give away, what they lose as time evolves. But the thing is, I don't actually know that much about history. I'm not one of those history nerds who reads a lot of history books. I couldn't tell you about, you know, the defining historical moment, the technology that allowed the Spartans to defeat the Athenians, or what the Akkadians passed on to the Assyrians, or anything like that. So I threw the offer out to other people. I said, does anyone want to co-design a game with me? I've got this interesting mechanic about passing things on. I think we could have a different look at history, especially, you know, moving on from some of the more traditional ideas of how history progresses and looking at how cultures exchange things, cultures with different values besides Western cultures. We sat down, we threw some ideas around on email, and we made a list of some ideas we wanted to explore, but we never really got anything because nothing was really firing and inspiring and making me want to jump in and make the game. So I said, let's leave it for a while, let's put it on the back burner, let me incubate, which is a very important process where your brain thinks about it subconsciously. So I did that. Then a competition came up from the folks at the game company who make all the little games, and I cannot remember their name, and it will come to me because it's incubating right now. And they were looking for a competition about games about actual places. And so I started thinking about an idea about a game about the street where I live. And then all of a sudden that started to mutate in my head, and I thought about that mechanic and I brought it back forward. I was like, okay, if I was making a game about where I live, it would sort of be about the story of my life on that street. And then all of a sudden I started telling the story about my own story, about when I was very poor. And how I went through that process, and it became an act of grieving, and I was pulling things out of my head, really painful things, cards about the suffering that I went through, and it's an incredible cathartic experience, and this game came out of it from me. And I think what's part of that story is that I was finding the story that I wanted to tell, and the story that I needed to tell, and the story that I was passionate about. That was the story that I needed to tell and wanted to tell. That was the thing that I knew. It doesn't mean I don't know that much about history. I could still make a Civ game. But what it was about is what I was passionate about. I think that's what Write What You Know is really about. It's write what you care about. Write who you are. Write what you are. Write the story you want to tell. The thing is, though, you won't always know what that story is, because a lot of us want to be what we see. You know, I think that's natural. When you're creative, you see the world is full of Civ games. Civ games are respected. Civ games are important. So, like, of course, I'm going to see if I can design my own Civ game to prove that I'm a real game designer. But that wasn't the story I wanted to tell this time. Not with that game. Maybe in the future I'll tell something else. But I thought I should tell that story, and I ended up writing the story that I wanted to tell instead. And that's, I think, what Write What You Know is all about. It's thinking about, don't try to copy other people. Don't try to be that game designer over there. Don't try to be Eric Lang or Hugh Rosenberg or Reiner Knizia. You have to be yourself. And honestly, this is going to keep happening through your design career, because you are always going to be thinking about emulating, because as an artist, you're inspired by other people. Right? Relics originally started out being a Cortex game because I was inspired by people like Cam Banks, who made incredible stuff with that. Then I wanted it to be like Shadow of the Demon Lord because I wanted to be Rob Schwab. I'm always trying to be somebody else and tell stories that are not necessarily my story, make games that aren't necessarily my game. So every time I start like that, and then I find the story I'm really telling. And it's not about, you won't always know to start off. Don't sit down and go, well, what do I know? But be open to the process that as you make a game, it's going to become your story, and that's okay. Don't try to force it back into being somebody else's story. Don't try to be somebody else's game. Don't try to make somebody else's game. Don't try to be some other kind of game designer. Be you. Make your game. That's the message of the story. When they say write what you know, it's write who you are. Write what you believe in. Write what you're passionate about, because that's all that matters. That's your game, your story, your design. Accept it. Let it come. Let that story come out, and don't try to be anything else. That's it for today. See you next time. Pat dogs, be good, have fun, play games.